We are grateful you are joining us today. This week we welcome Heather Carter, author of Soul Selfie, our guest speaker. Her message is entitled, Trusting God in the Chaos. She gave this message November 6th, 2022 at First Christian Church of Napa.
Being up here is really kind of familiar and strange at the same time. In my past life, I stood up here for junior high Christmas concerts because I went to the Christian school when I moved here. I sang up here for worship teams in high school and in college, and then I was actually married right where I'm standing now by my father-in-law, Ron Carter. Yeah. I'm so sad that Ron isn't here with us, at least in person. I'm sure he is somehow in spirit. He would have loved this. And it was really strange. I was texting my husband saying, it's very strange and kind of disconcerting to sit here waiting to go up and speak when I've sat out there for years and years watching my father-in-law prepare to go up to speak. So this just kind of messes with my mind a little bit. He passed away last year from cancer, so I know he would have especially loved my message from Friday night. I was telling the girls because he was if you've ever heard him preach, how many of you have heard Ron preach before? He was the king of acrostic sermons. If you remember what those are. So the other night, my outline spelled out selfie. So I was like, Pam read it for me, and she was like, oh, Ron would have loved that. I've also hung out with some of you, or maybe your kids, as a bratty, know-it-all teenager that I was, and for that, I can formally apologize. I hung out with Alan when I was probably in high school. He was a little bit older, but that vault is sealed. We're not going to talk about any of that. No, actually, he was a great guy and one of the more, shall I say, respectful and kind older college students that were hanging out with us when we were here in high school. So I also remember sitting where you are when Ron came for his preaching audition, for lack of a better word. His kids didn't come, but from what I assessed after seeing Ron and Pam, and if you've seen them, you know what I mean, very well put together, I concluded there was a pretty good chance that his 16-year-old son might be worth looking into if they moved here. And they did. And I did. And at the time, I determined that he just wasn't the one for me. But knowing that he was the new kid, and I had moved a lot in my past, I was trying to be kind and make him feel welcome, so I think our youth group went to Six Flags right after they moved here, and I made a point to include him and rode on several rides with him. When he found out I wasn't interested in him romantically like I appeared to be, his vow was that he would never, ever be involved with me, since apparently I was a tease and sort of a hussy. Well, this summer we celebrated 30 years of marriage. Yeah. He learned it's a good idea not to tell God what you're not going to do. We have 3 wonderful children, which is something I told God that I would never do. 2 was my limit. I sincerely thought we were on the same page, but he pulled a fast one on me. So our oldest son, Berkeley, is 26, and he lives in Pasadena. Bennett is 22 and lives in Springfield, Illinois, near us. And Emma is 21 and lives in Malibu, California. You see a pattern? I figure if I just keep sending my kids out to California, then I have a better chance of ending up here someday. So I feel overwhelmed when I consider the gift it is to still be alive and be part of my family. So if you were here in 2015, you might remember me, or at least stories about me. 2015 was when I was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. Many of you may be responsible for the prayers that kept me alive. I'm so grateful to stand up here and say thank you in person. So I don't want to spend a long time focusing on the disease this morning because this is not a sad message, it's a hopeful message. But I want to get to the solution as quickly as possible after we talk a little bit more about the trauma that I had to overcome to find the perspective that we're going to highlight this morning. So I remember it like it was last Thursday. I've been having symptoms for months. They had actually diagnosed me with rheumatoid arthritis. That still didn't seem right to us because there was just no other explanation. It all came to a head. You guys are really involved in this. You don't even know it, but Napa kind of plays a significant role in us figuring out what was going on with me. I had been here visiting and gone on a hike with my sister and my mom, and they were totally kicking my butt. They were so far ahead of me, and I could only walk from about here to that wall without having to stop and recover because my heart was just pounding out of my chest, and my legs felt like I had been running a marathon. When I was here, I also got home and noticed there was a hematoma on my leg, a bruise about this big, just from hitting it on the bedpost at my mom's house while I was visiting here. So I don't remember all of the other symptoms. I do remember very clearly that our dear friend Claudia Arnett kind of cornered me before I left and said, "You need to get yourself to Mayo Clinic. There is something bigger wrong with you." And I don't think she meant mentally, but that was probably true also. But definitely, she's like, there's something serious going on. I also, when I got home, I had bruises on both of my forearms just from resting my arm on the armrest on the airplane. And I'm no doctor, but that did not seem like rheumatoid arthritis to me. So long story short, I went to the doctor the next week at 11 in the morning and kind of demanded a complete blood count. By 4 o'clock that day, they called and told me over the phone that my blood counts were indicative of leukemia and that I needed to get to the hospital immediately, that they had a bed for me. So by 5 o'clock, I was sitting in the hospital in a room where I would stay for the next 35 days. Because of the abruptness of this diagnosis, answering texts and calls became overwhelming. So my husband set up a blog for us to update people on the status of my cancer. And I'm sure that some of you may have logged on to kind of keep track of that. This quickly morphed into me reflecting on the status of my soul. I did the writing until about week 3 when I got a secondary infection and ended up intubated in ICU for 9 days with a secondary infection. So they flew my son, Berkeley, home from California where he was at his freshman year at Biola. They weren't sure if I was going to make it. I told the girls at our party on Friday night that because God used my husband, who is not a doctor, who did some research, thank you WebMD, and suggested that they give me a Neupogen shot, and hoping that it would boost my immune system and maybe cause me to wake up. So once they gave me that shot, I woke up a couple days later. It wasn't looking good up until that point. So to this day, it gives me great pleasure that if he pushes back on anything I do, I remind him, like, hey, I don't want to hear it. You had your chance, buddy. You know, you're the one who told the doctors what to do. You could have just kept your mouth shut, so I don't want to hear any whining. So I was released from ICU on March 3rd, but I was still very, very sick. When I woke up, I couldn't walk, talk, roll over, shower, or eat by myself. I was 44 years old, and I went home with a shower chair and a walker. In spite of that, the opening chapter of my first book is dated March 29th. Because even though I wasn't sure if I was even going to live through leukemia, I didn't want to wait to share with others what God was doing in me. So I kept writing. And through the reaction that I got from those reading my blogs, I learned that I wasn't the only one struggling. As I was preparing for this message, I was reminded of a few lessons that I had forgotten that I was forced to learn the hard way a few years ago. So much of what I'm going to say comes from a couple of books that I published as a result of this experience. They are collections of blogs that I started writing during my cancer journey. So my first one is called Soul Selfie. And the title is called Soul Selfie because I really sensed that when I was in the hospital that God said to me, Heather, you are a full-time job. You've spent way too much time focusing and taking snapshots of everybody else's behavior and either trying to imitate it or judging it. I need you to focus on yourself. So you need to flip that little camera back around and take a picture of what's going on in your own soul and basically mind your own business. So this is me minding my own business in this first book, and I wanted to show you the cover of this because I love this one. These are all selfies that I forced my readers and family members and doctors to take. They kept trying to send me just a picture. I'm like, nope, I can tell that's not a selfie. I want it to be painful, trying to figure out how to take a selfie from whatever angle. And I laugh because doctors, super smart, saved my life, but they cannot take selfies. I had to get in the picture with my doctor and then crop myself out in order to get their pictures. So they're on here. Some of you are my friends here. Claudia, how I already mentioned, she's on here. My parents, Ron and Pam, my sister. So that's a fun cover. And then the second, so that's the first 120 blogs I wrote during my cancer journey. And then my next book is the next 120 chunk of blogs. So I love this one too because, and I just have to tell you guys about it, because this is from a little Zen garden in Sonoma where my mom took a picture of me, and then I had my daughter do some graphic design to it to make it my book cover. So Napa just keeps coming up again and again, so I'm so glad to be here sharing with you. So really the fact that I wrote anything that anyone would ever read or enjoy is a miracle. I had never written anything before I had cancer, and I never wanted to write anything. In fact, one of my main readers is my college English professor, and never once when I was in college did she say, you should totally do this for a living. Never. So I know it was a miracle that came out of suffering and struggles. But God has given me this gift in order to encourage others and come alongside them in their small and sometimes overwhelming battles. So as it stands, even though my cancer is in remission, I'm still soul sick in many ways and will most likely never run out of material. At any given time, we're experiencing events in our lives involving trauma, drama, and the minutia of everyday life. So learning how to integrate God into all of it is what I write about. It all counts. It's all part of your story. It all matters and is useful in helping people connect with God and others. I'm passionate about walking alongside others as we learn how to let God have access to every nook and cranny of our lives. So with the time we have left today, I want to focus on the first one of those, trusting in the trauma, the most obvious and typical type of circumstance that triggers us either to abandon ourselves to God or too often resent Him. So trauma is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. I think it's safe to assume that most of us have had our fair and sometimes unfair share of trauma. Since we're talking about trauma that triggered my writing and eventually spending time with you today, my leukemia battle, I want to walk through some of the things that I learned about my relationship with God and others as a result of traveling that journey. This is a type of instant pot intimacy with God. It can be learned in no other way but through suffering and reaching your proverbial bottom. The intense heat and pressures of life can transform us in ways that can take years to develop otherwise. So if you are out there and you're a worksheet kind of person, there should be some little sheets by you. If you don't have any, you can probably grab some at the back. It says trusting God in the trauma. So you can fill it in, or you can just pretend to fill it in and draw something cute while you're sitting there. But either way, that's there for you to use as a guide. So use the spaces. I won't even know the difference if you're not taking notes. So regardless, so if you look on your first blanks there, you can fill these in with me. Regardless of what we go through, we always have a choice. We can get better or we can get bitter. Here are some lessons that I chose one day at a time to learn to learn how to get better. The first one is cultivate community before the catastrophe. Cultivate community before the catastrophe. As I mentioned earlier, I had gotten my real estate license right before my cancer diagnosis. Because of this, as prompted by my managing broker, I wrote 100 handwritten notes reconnecting with friends and members of our former church of whom I had not seen in years. I also got on social media for the first time. So by the time I got cancer 2 months later, I had laid the groundwork for the support that was imperative to my family during my cancer battle. Many of these people brought meals, prayed for our kids, or prayed and picked up our kids, cleaned my house, weeded my yard. I'm still working on some sort of scheme to get a couple of those perks back. I really liked when people were cleaning my house and working in my yard. So one of the best illustrations I mentioned to the girls the other night that helps me understand this idea of community and the dangers of isolation is from a movie I saw a few years ago called 127 Hours with James Franco. Has anybody seen that? It's an old one. It's about a guy who goes rock climbing and gets his arm wedged between the canyon wall and a giant boulder for 127 hours. So at one point, he's videotaping himself. He's basically talking about how sorry he is that he hadn't called his mom back, which obviously should be on his mind, and how in trying to appear a superhero and independent, he had told no one where he was going. He said, "This rock has been waiting for me my whole life. I did this to myself." And spoiler alert, when he finally saws off his own arm and sets himself free, he comes across some hikers, and the camera zooms in on him screaming, "Help, help, help, I need help, I need help." We may feel like we can do life on our own until disaster strikes, and we are lonely, exhausted, and despairing. But we need each other to navigate life, practically, emotionally, and spiritually. Don't wait until the catastrophe comes to build this foundation. Start now. Number 2 is you can't cram for serenity. You can't cram for serenity. This is not a test that can be passed by pulling an all-nighter. Are any of you here Seinfeld fans? We are in my family. In fact, we used to videotape them, so we would just every week put it in and videotape. So when I was actually in labor with my first child, Berkeley, there was this a continuous loop of Seinfeld videos going on in our room. I remember the doctor coming in one time and saying, "Is this the longest running episode of Seinfeld? Every time I come in here, Seinfeld is on." So in one episode, since I have most of them memorized, Kramer, Jerry's quirky neighbor, decides that he can manage his stressful parts of his life by simply claiming serenity now. George, one of their other friends, suggests that serenity now equals insanity later. So as trials and frustrations arise, Kramer repeats the mantra, serenity now, till eventually he just snaps and starts destroying everything around him in a rage, screaming, "Serenity now!" So if we simply claim serenity, but don't ask God for it, it does indeed end in insanity. Though I believe God gives special graces and speaks gently and intimately to those in deep and dark places, the longevity and health of your heart and soul depend on preparing now for what is to come. When disaster and death were at our doorstep, I knew exactly where my help would come from. I spent 70 days admitted to the hospital over 7 months. I was never really lonely because I knew my God and enjoyed his presence. I'd been in personal, consistent relationship with him. I read spiritual literature, regularly prayed, attended Bible studies and church services, and wrestled with him in the dark night of the soul. I had been training for this event for years. I love how author Oswald Chambers puts it. Crisis always reveals character. We have to put in the training time before the strain arises if we're to be spiritually fit enough to endure it with faith and trust. Oswald Chambers says in his 1915 vernacular, when he was writing, if you say, "I have no time for praying just now, no time for Bible reading, my opportunity hasn't come yet. When it does, of course I shall be all right." No, you will not. To talk in this way is like trying to produce the munitions of war in the trenches. You will be killed while you are doing it. If we do not do the running steadily in the little ways, we shall do nothing in the crisis. So start getting in fit spiritual shape now so that you'll be prepared for the inevitable marathon that is to come. Number 3, serve while sick. This was perhaps the biggest aha that came to me as I struggled along my journey. I realized that even though I battled the disease of cancer, that my soul had a disease, and I wasn't the only one suffering from it. We actually are all soul sick. We all battle what I refer to as the common plagues of the heart, plagues like worry, doubt, fear, resentment, just to name a few. However, we don't have to be 100% cured in order to help others. Today is not too soon to start serving others and sharing our story of strength and hope to those who need it. I used to share in hindsight, but through trauma, I learned that others listen differently when I share in my messiness rather than after I have gotten all cleaned up. Several years ago, I remember listening to a speaker. The guy was talking about how he was asked to fill in as a biology professor. He had 0 schooling in biology and no training on the subject, but they were desperate, so he agreed. So he would literally study the lesson the night before class, teach the topic the next day, and then go home and study for the next day's lesson. He learned brand new material every night and taught it the following day as if he'd known it for years. One day after class, an enamored student came up to him and said, "Oh, you're just so smart and knowledgeable. I just wish that I knew as much about biology as you do." And he thought to himself, well, tomorrow you will. And I just love that because I think that's all God really expects of us. You might not be cured. You might just be one day ahead of someone else who's struggling with parenting or in a loveless marriage, an addiction, a tough boss or a toxic coworker, an ailing parent or a wayward child. You don't need to have all the answers or even a solid belief that everything's going to be okay. You just need enough experience, strength, and hope to help someone get through today. Over time, they can learn to carry that message to others. Number 4, uncertainty is certain. Uncertainty is certain. Be acutely aware that you weren't in control of anything before the trauma came and knocked the wind out of you, before the cancer or the divorce or the addiction. You were just delusional. And by delusional, I mean that you were choosing to believe something that just wasn't true, that you had things under your control. You lived believing that you were managing your little life pretty nicely. The reality is your situation was equally as precarious before things exploded or you imploded. You just weren't aware of it. At any given time in our life, things can be interrupted by events that we didn't expect or plan for. I love what Scripture says in James 4:13 through 15. You who say today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money, well, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What you ought to say is, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. You mistakenly think that you are in complete control of your life. So what is the solution? I mean, we have to make plans, right? The best thing that I can come up with is make your plans, but hold them loosely. The fear that threatens to steal my sleep is arrested when I remember and believe that even though the future is uncertain, God is not. My buddy Oswald Chambers laid it out for me in words that give me clarity and comfort. To be certain of God means that we are uncertain in all our ways. We do not know what a day may bring forth. And this is generally said with a sigh of sadness. It should rather be an expression of breathless expectation. We are uncertain of the next step, but we are certain of God. A friend of mine reminds me regularly that God either is or he isn't. In other words, either you can trust him for everything or nothing at all. My job is to draw close to God, to put myself under his care every day, in every situation, with everyone I love and everyone I have trouble loving. I am hardly ever certain, even of what I'm doing at the very moment. But what I can know, and all I really have to know, is who God is and that he is trustworthy. That doesn't mean I won't feel apprehensive about life once in a while. My human nature still attempts and tempts me to play God. Around our house, there's a running joke aimed cruelly at me and maybe a few of my friends that says, I am not always right, but I'm always certain. I may be completely off base or flat out wrong, but I will fight tooth and nail to get my way or have you acknowledge that I know what the heck I'm talking about. I'm not always right, but I'm always certain. But what I really, really long to be is certain in uncertainty, certain of God in the face of uncertain futures. Jesus said, believe in me, not believe certain things about me. I will try to practice what Oswald suggests. Leave the whole thing to God. It is gloriously uncertain how he will come in, but he will come. Remain loyal to him. And the last one, number 5, pain levels the playing field. When I was first admitted to the hospital, 2 different people who had the same disease as me came to my room to tell me that they knew how I felt and that they were there to support me. I didn't know or care how old they were, if they had kids, where they worked, who they voted for, what religion they were. I just knew that we were suffering from the same disease, the same sickness, and it created an instant camaraderie that I had with no one else. And that's the reason that recovery community can rescue people who are suffering and are threatened by addiction. They know that they are all suffering from the same disease that could literally kill them if they get sidetracked by anything other than their primary purpose of staying clean. Churches would do well to remember that we are all sinners saved by grace, period. We need to stop posing and posturing and remember that we're all connected as children of God and let the rest fall away. Focus on our similarities rather than our differences. Whether we admit it or not, our disease has leveled the playing field as well. We are all affected by our own sins and those of others. None of us is better than the next guy, yet somehow we pretend otherwise. We're all comparing ourselves with those around us one way or another. We think, well, at least I'm not as bad as that girl, or gosh, I wish I could be as spiritual as that guy. God says that we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. That's why he sent Jesus, to make up the difference. I wish with all my heart that when messed up, rough, and raw people, and even dressed up, polished, guarded people came to church, they could confess their junk, and instead of a judgmental pursing of the lips, they would get a hug and a cup of coffee and a listening ear and your phone number and a glad you're here, keep coming back. Keep coming back next week and next month and next year, as long as it takes. As long as it takes. As long as it takes you to truly embrace an authentic life of faith and recovery and remission from our common disease. As long as it takes. And we will love you unconditionally for as long as it takes. And just in case you're wondering how long that is for most of us, it will be a lifetime. Because the effects of the disease started in the garden and will most likely run as long as we have breath in us. There's so much we can learn about ourselves and do in life with each other if we are willing to learn about, apply, and share the wisdom God has provided from every avenue of life that he brings our way. My life is richer and my perspective clearer as a result of what I have experienced and what some might call these devastating circumstances. But I truly wouldn't change a thing. God's playing field has been leveled. Whose field are you playing on? So I want to button things up this morning by reminding us that when trauma comes, it tries to trick us into believing that we're the only ones struggling. It whispers to us that we must have done something wrong, and God is either mad or disappointed in us. I recently told one of my nurses that I'm friends with that the last thing I remember before I was intubated, I remember saying, I look like I'm going to have a baby, because my stomach was distended out to here. And then that's the last thing I remember until I woke up in ICU. She said, she actually got kind of teary and said, I remember the last thing you said to me before you were intubated. You looked up at me and said, what am I doing wrong? That makes me very sad to think that I suspected that I had done something wrong to get myself in that kind of a suffering situation. Many people out there believe that when they suffer, they must be doing something wrong and that God is punishing them. Or maybe you believe that too. You're just afraid to admit it or say it out loud. The Bible says that the rain falls on the just and the unjust. My paraphrase of that is, good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. What we do with those things and what we learn from them depends on how we partner with God and letting Him redeem them. Our temptation is to pout or over-medicate or over-control or numb out or isolate. We get so hyper-focused on trying to navigate and fix the situation that we neglect our bodies, our souls, and even the relationship with the God we once thought we could trust. This is all a common reaction. It's normal to go there, but it's not safe to stay. When hard times come, we have a choice. Like I said, we can get better or we can get bitter. If you attempt to apply some of these lessons to your own trauma, maybe you can get to the hopeful part more quickly without having to trudge slowly through the confusion and the despair. So if you're interested in learning more about trusting God in the trauma, as well as the drama and the minutia of everyday life, you can go to my website. It's heathercarterwrites.com. In my book, on this book, there's actually a little QR code that you can scan. We were so proud of our ladies the other night. Some of them figured out how to do that for the first time. It was like, if you learned nothing else, you learned how to use your QR code. But the thing I love about the way my website is set up is that, this is 120 blogs, this one's 120 blogs, there are another 100 blogs that are not in any book, and then I continue to write once a week. And if you go to my site, if you're struggling, let's say, with forgiveness or resentment, you can go down and browse the blogs by category and click on forgiveness, and everything I've ever written about forgiveness or resentment will pop up, and you can just immerse yourself in hearing some things from one crazy person to another maybe, how you can maybe get some hope. Sometimes all you need to know is that you're not the only one who feels that way. So go check that out. I strongly believe that no matter where you are in life, you will relate to what I write. In fact, the person who encouraged me to compile my first book into all my blogs into my first book is one of my other favorite Rons is Ron Bircher. He is a businessman and a Christian man, but he's 50 years older than I am. And he would read it every day and have his secretary, he couldn't probably figure out how to get to it, but he'd have his secretary print it out and hand it to him. But he doesn't seem like he would have anything in common with me, yet that was a lifeline for him. So when you read, no matter who you are or where you're at with God, I think you will soon realize that you are not alone in your struggles and that there is always hope. Will you guys pray with me? Father God, I know from my experience that when I'm open and listening, that you always share with me at least one area of my life that needs some tweaking or needed some encouragement. I pray that the words today have been a balm for somebody who felt like their heart was raw and hurting, or they felt lonely, like they're the only one struggling. God, help us to remember that we are all in this together. You come alongside us, and you also put people alongside us to remind us that we're not the only ones, and that you have given us your hands and feet by providing people around us who also love you. Help us to use our stories to bring hope and light and healing to those around us. Don't let us be afraid. Help us remember that with what we share with someone else, we can sometimes save their lives. Thank you for loving us. I just pray for these people as they go out from here today. And Thank you for the blessing of being here. I pray these things in your name. Amen.
Thanks again for joining us for today's message from First Christian Church. If you'd like to take a step in your faith and connect with a staff member at FCC, visit fccnapa.org/connect. To stay up to date on things going on in the FCC community, we invite you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to the FCC Napa YouTube channel. Have a great day.